Richard Whitmore was a man many envied. At 52, he had built a successful life that most people could only dream of. He owned properties across Europe, had a devoted wife named Margaret, and 2 grown children who attended top universities. From the outside, Richard seemed to have it all. But behind his well-tailored suits and polished charm hid a craving he couldn't explain. A craving for something dangerous, forbidden, and thrilling. That craving eventually led him to Dubai City, where secrets are easy to keep, and temptations are always within reach. It all began during a business conference at a luxury hotel in downtown Dubai. After the meetings ended, Richard stayed back for a few extra days. He claimed it was for exploring potential investment opportunities. But in truth, he was already intrigued by the city's nightlife and its hidden luxuries. One evening, while scrolling through a discreet elite dating app, he came across a profile that instantly grabbed his attention. Her name was Layla, 24 years old, with striking green eyes and a quiet confidence that seemed to pour from every photo. She wasn't like the other women on the app. There was something magnetic about her. They met the following night at a rooftop bar overlooking the Burj Khalifa. Layla was stunning in a way that made the room go silent. Richard, despite his experience, felt oddly nervous. She spoke little but knew exactly how to keep him hanging on every word. That night, they laughed, drank, and exchanged glances that made the rest of the world fade. For Richard, it felt like he was waking up from a long sleep. He was captivated, and Layla knew it. Over the next few months, their affair deepened. Richard began flying to Dubai more frequently. Each time, he would book the same penthouse suite, send Layla gifts in advance, and spend days locked away from reality. Layla was smart. She never asked too many questions, never pushed too hard. She gave just enough of herself to keep him chasing more. But behind the scenes, she was watching closely, learning everything about him, his habits, passwords, financial accounts, and most importantly, his weaknesses. Back in London, Margaret grew suspicious. Richard had started acting differently, more distracted, more secretive. She questioned him, but he dismissed her concerns with stories of growing business, opportunities in the Middle East. She didn't know he had opened a secret bank account under a false name, or that he had already wired thousands to Layla over the past 6 months. Layla wasn't just playing the role of a lover. She was building a file, photos of them in intimate settings, videos from their private encounters, receipts of expensive gifts, and audio clips of Richard confessing things he never intended anyone else to hear. What he believed was love, she saw as leverage. But she wasn't working alone. A man named Igor had entered the picture quietly, posing as her cousin who occasionally helped with rent and errands. In truth, he was her handler, a part of an organized criminal network targeting rich foreigners in the Gulf region. Igor monitored her messages, advised her on how far to push, and planned what was to come. Richard, blinded by desire and arrogance, didn't see the danger building around him. While the skyscrapers of Dubai shimmered in the sunlight, Richard stood at the edge of a life he no longer controlled. He thought he had found passion, escape, and youth. What he had really found was a trap disguised as romance. And as he ignored the growing signs, he was unknowingly walking straight into the darkest chapter of his life. Richard's obsession with Layla grew like a slow poison. What began as a thrilling distraction turned into an all-consuming fixation. He started making reckless decisions, the kind that no seasoned businessman should ever make. His company in London noticed his absence in critical meetings. His replies to emails became delayed, sometimes never sent at all. He began missing flights, extending his stays in Dubai without informing anyone, including his family. All for Layla. She had become the center of his universe, and she knew it. Each time he returned, she would change just enough new look, new tone, new emotional distance to make him chase her even harder. She was no longer the sweet girl from the rooftop bar. Now she played him with silence, with vanishing acts, and with calculated outbursts that left him confused and desperate. Richard, in his vulnerability, mistook her coldness for depth. He couldn't see that every moment she gave him was part of a script carefully written with someone else. Igor, the man behind the curtain, was pulling the strings. His control over Layla was not based on affection, but manipulation. He had found her years earlier in a European city, broken, searching for a way out of poverty. He trained her, taught her how to mimic affection, how to read men's desires, and most importantly, how to extract secrets without ever asking a direct question. Layla was the perfect bait, and Richard had fallen completely under her spell. By the time Richard realized things were slipping, it was already too late. Layla had begun making demands that went beyond gifts or vacations. She wanted real control. She asked for access to one of his offshore accounts, claiming she needed a buffer in case he ever left her behind. When he hesitated, she hinted at exposure. She mentioned how easily his wife's lawyers could find out about their affair, how certain recordings could ruin his public reputation, how journalists would feast on his hypocrisy. Richard panicked. Instead of distancing himself, he tried to bargain. He increased her monthly allowance. He signed over the lease of a high-rise apartment. But with each act of submission, she only pushed further. Her messages became colder, often threatening to cut him off. She disappeared for days without notice, forcing Richard to drive through the city at night, checking her favorite spots, asking hotel concierges if they'd seen her. Meanwhile, Igor had begun collecting digital evidence. He hacked Richard's emails, tracked his browser activity, and accessed files from his business computer using spyware unknowingly installed on one of Layla's gifted tablets. They had built a web of blackmail so tight that Richard couldn't move without triggering it. At one point, Richard considered coming clean to his wife. He thought of confessing everything, hoping that honesty might free him from this emotional prison. But the thought of losing his family, his company, and his status held him back. Shame became his silent cage. So he continued the charade, flying back and forth between two lives, pretending to be in control while drowning in fear and guilt. Dubai, once a symbol of escape, now felt like a prison made of gold. The city that promised pleasure had turned into a stage for his slow unraveling. And yet, even as the pressure mounted, Richard couldn't walk away. He was hooked, not just on Layla, but on the idea of her youth, desire, the illusion of being wanted. What he didn't know was that the final act was already being prepared. Igor had begun setting the pieces in place, and Layla, whether by fear or loyalty, was following his lead. Richard thought he was navigating a love affair. In truth, he was being led to a destination that would leave no way back. The air was heavy the night Richard received Layla's message. It arrived without warning, no emojis, no pet names, just a short command. Come to the apartment. We need to talk, alone. For a moment he hesitated. Something felt off. Her tone was too cold, too clinical. But by then, Richard was far past the point of rational thinking. He convinced himself that maybe she was ready to reconcile. Maybe she had realized how much he meant to her. He grabbed his coat and headed straight for the Marina Tower, where Layla had been staying for the past few weeks. Security in the building was tight, but Richard had been there many times. The guards recognized him. They smiled, let him pass, and noted nothing unusual. The elevator ride was slow, filled with the distant hum of jazz playing from the lobby below. He stepped out on the 43rd floor and walked down the corridor. The hallway lights flickered slightly, giving the space a ghostly feel. He knocked once on the door. It was already slightly open. Inside, the apartment was dim. A few candles flickered on the kitchen counter. Soft music played from somewhere in the bedroom. But Layla was nowhere to be seen. Richard called out, but no answer came. He walked further in, his footsteps echoing on the marble floors. On the table, A glass of wine stood untouched. Next to a photo frame, one of them at a private beach, smiling, a memory from happier times. His hand trembled as he picked it up. Then came the sound. A soft click behind him. Richard turned, expecting to see Layla, but instead, a figure in black lunged from the shadows. The attack was fast and brutal. Richard fought back, but he was caught off guard. The intruder struck him with a heavy object, likely a metal lamp, knocking him to the ground. Blood splattered across the tile. The struggle moved to the bathroom. In the chaos, a glass vase shattered. Richard tried to crawl away, reaching for his phone, but the attacker hit him again, hard. Silence followed. Neighbors later reported hearing strange noises around midnight, a thud, a crash, but assumed it was a drunken argument, not uncommon in high-rise buildings where privacy is sacred and questions are rarely asked. By morning, the apartment was silent again. No one noticed anything unusual. 18 hours later, building management performed a welfare check after repeated calls from Richard's driver went unanswered. What they found was disturbing. Richard's lifeless body lay in the bathtub, partially clothed, with blunt force. Trauma to the head. The water had overflowed hours ago. The scene appeared staged, too clean in some places, too messy in others. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no fingerprints other than Richard's, but two small clues stood out. A single earring found beneath the sink, with a tiny trace of skin still attached, and a necklace, its chain broken, bearing the initials, LB. The police collected the evidence and sealed off the apartment. Word of Richard's death spread quickly, but the cause remained unclear. Some whispered heart attack, others speculated suicide. But detectives weren't convinced. The positioning of the body, the bruises, and the missing surveillance footage from that night all pointed to something darker. Security cameras from the building had been wiped clean for a 6-hour window, an obvious sign of tampering. Whoever had done this was either a professional or had inside access. Layla was nowhere to be found. Her phone was off, her apartment empty, her social media accounts deleted. The only trace she left was the broken necklace and a void filled with unanswered questions. For the first time, Richard's two worlds, his secret affair and his public life, collapsed into one tragic reality. And the investigation was only just beginning. Detectives assigned to Richard Whitmore's case began piecing together the events leading up to his death. With no signs of forced entry and all security footage mysteriously erased, suspicion immediately fell on someone close to him. The broken necklace engraved with LB gave them their first real lead. It didn't take long to match the initials. To Layla Bogdanov, a woman with no official employment, no legal residence, and no traceable relatives in Dubai, she existed in whispers, in gift receipts, and in blurred images from exclusive events, always seen beside older men, but never alone. Authorities searched Layla's rented apartment. Most of it had been scrubbed clean. However, hidden behind a false wall panel, they discovered a hard drive containing encrypted folders. When digital experts cracked the files, what they found sent chills through the team. Dozens of hidden camera videos recorded over months inside Richard's penthouse, luxury hotel rooms, and private dinners. In some, Richard appeared intoxicated, speaking freely about business secrets, financial transactions, and intimate details of his life. It was clear this had never been a simple affair. It was a long-term setup, carefully executed. The videos also revealed another face. A man occasionally seen in the background, never speaking, always watching. Sometimes holding a camera, sometimes helping set up equipment. This was the same man Richard had once met briefly, introduced by Layla as her cousin. He was identified as Dmitry Sokolov, a known associate in Eastern European criminal circles. Dmitry had a history of involvement in high-level blackmail operations, particularly targeting businessmen in countries where the law often bends for money. The theory that emerged was chilling. Richard hadn't been killed in a moment of rage or jealousy. It was a calculated act, the final step in a sophisticated extortion plan. The investigation revealed that over the course of a year, Richard had transferred approximately $1.2 million into various accounts connected to Layla and Dimitri. Most of it had passed through shell companies based in the Caribbean and Eastern Europe. Tracing the money was difficult, but investigators linked a series of crypto wallet transactions to an IP address in Istanbul, where Layla's passport was used days after Richard's death. Interpol issued a red notice for Layla Bogdanov and Dmitry Sokolov, but catching them proved harder than expected. Both had vanished, leaving behind almost no digital footprint. The only lingering presence was a cloud server found through metadata on the hard drive. It contained a folder titled Insurance. Inside were backup copies of the videos, screenshots of Richard's messages, bank transfers, and even voice recordings of conversations he'd thought were private. This folder confirmed the theory. Layla and Dimitri had planned every step from seduction to surveillance to silence. As the scandal unfolded, Richard's family in London was forced to confront a double life they never suspected. His wife Margaret was devastated. Not only had she lost her husband, but she had inherited a storm of legal complications, public scrutiny, and unanswered questions. She filed a civil suit in the UK against Layla, hoping to freeze whatever assets she could. But most of the money was already gone, buried in anonymous accounts or spent in cities far from Dubai. Detectives also began looking into other potential victims. They uncovered similar patterns involving wealthy men from France, Saudi Arabia, and Canada, each with ties to Layla or a woman using a similar alias. It became clear that Richard's case was not isolated. It was part of a much larger, coordinated scheme. Still, Layla remained a ghost. No credit card activity, no border crossings, no sightings. Dimitri had vanished just as completely. The case grew colder, but the questions stayed warm. Who helped wipe the building's security footage? How did they get into the apartment so easily? And most haunting of all, was Richard ever really in control? Or was he a pawn from the very first message? Months passed, and the case that once dominated headlines slowly faded from public memory. Richard Whitmore's death had become another unsolved mystery tucked beneath Dubai's polished surface. The media moved on. The whispers in luxury hotel lobbies dulled. But behind the scenes, law enforcement agencies across multiple countries continued digging. Richard's name may have disappeared from the news, but his case had exposed a dangerous international ring that had gone unnoticed for years. Then, a sudden breakthrough. A hotel maid working at a luxury resort in the Maldives contacted local authorities after recognizing a woman who matched Layla Bogdanov's description. The guest had been staying under the name Anna Volkov and paid exclusively in cash. She had no visible electronics, avoided cameras, and refused housekeeping services. Surveillance footage from the hallway confirmed it. The face had changed. The hair was darker, but the posture, the voice, and the small scar near her left ear were unmistakable. It was her. Interpol responded quickly, alerting local authorities and preparing a sting operation. But by the time agents arrived at the resort, the room was empty. Layla had vanished again. Inside the suite, they found only traces burned receipts. In the bathroom sink, a wiped mobile phone hidden under a cushion and a single photograph torn in half. The other half showed Richard smiling beside her on a yacht, unaware that the camera behind the lens would become his undoing. The disappearance proved once more how skilled and well-resourced Layla and Dimitri truly were. Intelligence agencies now believed that the two were working with a broader network that specialized in high-stakes romance-based extortion. These networks recruited women, trained them in seduction and manipulation, and assigned them targets based on wealth and influence. The operations were cold, methodical, and lucrative. Richard's death was likely not a spontaneous act of violence, but the result of a plan gone wrong. Perhaps he had threatened to expose them, or perhaps he finally refused another demand. Either way, it sealed his fate. And though no one had yet been arrested, the files recovered from Layla's cloud server had helped law enforcement identify dozens of other victims across Europe, Asia, and the Gulf. In London, Richard's wife Margaret pursued what justice she could. The civil suit resulted in a partial freeze of assets connected to a shell company Dmitri had once used. Some of the stolen funds were recovered, though a small fraction of the total. More than money, Margaret wanted closure. But that remained out of reach. She never received an apology, a note, or even confirmation of who had actually killed her husband. All she had was the image of a man she no longer recognized. A man who had lived a lie and died alone in a stranger's bathroom. The authorities, though frustrated by the lack of arrests, saw Richard's case as a turning point. It had drawn attention to a new kind of predator, one that operated in silence, exploiting wealth and loneliness behind designer curtains and high-rise glass towers. Workshops were held across cities like Dubai, London, and Geneva to train investigators on digital honey traps, crypto laundering, and psychological manipulation tactics. But Layla? She was never seen again. Some believe she underwent surgery to alter her appearance. Others think she and Dmitri parted ways, splitting the money and disappearing into separate lives. A few even believe she was eliminated by the same network she once worked for, a loose end too dangerous to leave behind. Richard Whitmore's story ended in tragedy, but its impact rippled far beyond his death. It exposed the fragile boundary between desire and destruction, love and deception, truth and illusion. In the shimmering mirage of Dubai, he found everything he was looking for, except a way out.